Hello and welcome to the Stone Church Bible Study. I'm Reverend Terrence, one of the pastors here in this church. Today I want to take a closer look at a passage of scripture that I think is a favorite of many people. It's the story about the woman caught in adultery, and it's found in the 8th chapter of John's Gospel. This is, needless to say, a very moving story. It's very instructive, and I think it's very relevant, particularly to our time and to our culture. So I'm excited about taking a deeper look at it today. First, though, let me say this. If this Bible study was helpful to you in your walk of faith, please leave a like. And for more from Stone Church, more sermons, more Bible studies, and more services, please subscribe. All right, so let's dive right into it. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery." I think the most striking and disturbing thing here is the position that this poor woman finds herself in. So here she is, and she's charged with one of the worst crimes that one could possibly be charged with, at least in Jesus' time anyway. And she's dragged off to this very public place, probably begging for mercy the whole way. And then she's made to stand in the middle of this crowd of mostly men so that she can be gawked at. And then the Pharisees and the scribes announced to Jesus, and really they announced to everybody else, that she had been caught in the very act of committing adultery. So now all the crowd knows about this shameful thing that this woman has done, and they're all glaring at her with contempt and with outrage. Clearly, the Pharisees don't have this woman's well-being in mind, or for that matter, the well-being of her husband or her kids. They're not concerned with healing. They're not concerned with reconciliation. In fact, they're not even concerned with some sort of justice being meted out. For them, this woman is the centerpiece of a very cruel and very perverse game of show and tell. All they're interested in here is this: humiliating Jesus and destroying his reputation. And if this woman is killed in the process, they really don't care. So they say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" Okay, so the Pharisees actually do have a point here. In the law of Moses, it states, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Now granted, the method of execution isn't specified here in Leviticus, but it does say in Deuteronomy that if a woman who is engaged to be married has an affair with somebody, then both her and the affair partner are to be put to death, specifically by stoning. So I think all of this raises a peripheral question. Where is the man, i.e., where is the affair partner in this scene? Why is only the woman present? And needless to say, this just doesn't seem fair. And it also suggests that the Pharisees aren't nearly as committed to a literal reading of the law of Moses as it would seem. So maybe a bit of hypocrisy there on behalf of the Pharisees. At any rate, the law of Moses does call for the stoning of this woman, and Jesus knows this. The Pharisees know that Jesus knows this. And so they ask him, "Now Jesus, what do you say?" "Jesus, we know where Moses stands, but what about you?" Now, what it says in the next verse I think is really key. They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Again, the Pharisees only want to see Jesus discredited here. And by this time in Jesus' ministry, he was well known for his compassion towards the despised, towards the hated. Whether we're talking about corrupt, traitorous tax collectors with whom he sat down and actually ate dinner, or prostitutes whom he welcomed and forgave. Therefore, Jesus' opponents know that he's probably going to demonstrate mercy towards this woman. And the Pharisees and the scribes would then be ready with their retort. They'd probably say something like, "See everyone? He hates Moses. He despises the law of our ancestors." They may even accuse him of going against his own teaching here. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew's Gospel. "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished." And now the Pharisees, I guess, can say to the crowds, look, I guess the good rabbi isn't as committed to the law of Moses as he professed to be earlier on. So it seems like Jesus is stuck here. If he demonstrates mercy on this woman, he is accused of despising the law of Moses. If he picks up a stone to hurl at the woman, which of course Jesus would never do, he'd be going against the whole thrust and message of his ministry. So Jesus does the unexpected. Nothing. Now listen to what it says in the next verse. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. Now, Jesus' actions here have prompted a tremendous amount of speculation. Why did he stoop down to write in the soil? Now, some have suggested that he was writing down the sins of the Pharisees in the dust, thereby referencing this obscure verse from the book of Jeremiah. But honestly, I don't think it's that complicated. You see, the Pharisees were hoping that by this time, Jesus would be thrown off balance. They were hoping that he would be either struck silent or that he would start babbling maybe defensively, which often happens when you best an opponent in a debate. But Jesus does none of those things. He remains calm. And I think unconsciously perhaps, he performs a gesture that demonstrates this. He doesn't respond right away, but he just stoops down and starts drawing in the sand. It's like as if he were doodling almost. The whole writing in the dust thing is also interesting because it's an irrelevant detail. I think if you were to take that detail away from the story, it really wouldn't change much at all. But as an irrelevant detail, it does suggest an eyewitness testimony. Only an eyewitness, only somebody who was actually there would care to mention this really minor detail that really doesn't have much bearing on the story. So maybe the first person to write this story down actually had access to somebody who saw this incident unfolding with their own eyes, or maybe the author himself saw the incident unfolding with their own eyes. It's hard to say, but I do think that this little detail suggests that it's a story based on eyewitness testimony. At any rate, when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. So please notice, Jesus isn't saying here that adultery is okay. He doesn't say anything along the lines of, well, we're talking about two consenting adults here, so what's the big deal? No, adultery is a serious offense that does incur God's wrath. Jesus says nothing to contradict that notion. So in that respect, Jesus upholds, he affirms the law of Moses. Remember what Jesus said earlier, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. No, I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill." I think here, in so many words, Jesus is saying to his opponents, all right, you're right, the law of Moses does say that adultery is a serious sin. It does say the punishment is stoning. Very well, let's get going. Whoever is sinless can start us off. Or, to use the quote we're all familiar with, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." This is the idea I think Jesus is communicating here. You who take it upon yourselves to act as instruments of God's wrath, you who believe it's your duty to mete out divine punishment, I want you to ask yourself this: am I so perfect that I'm guaranteed to never find myself standing guilty before God? Because let me tell you this, if you're not perfect, if you have in fact sinned against God, be sure of this: you will be punished just as you have punished others. Or, Jesus says elsewhere, with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. I think this is a very important lesson for our time. Because with the advent of social media, we now have the means to engage in, not literal of course, but virtual stonings. And I think you know what I'm talking about here. Somebody makes a controversial statement, say for example on Facebook or on Twitter, and suddenly there's this virtual mob that materializes, basically intent on punishing the offender, intent on carrying out society's collective wrath. So what do? Well, they share the person's personal information, their address, their employer, their phone number, and all of a sudden the offender is fired from their job or inundated with hate mail or personally threatened and so on. No, this isn't as cruel as literal stonings are, but it is still cruel, and I think the same kind of principle is at work. And here I think it would be really wise for us to remember what the Lord has said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Like, think about it. Over the course of our lives, we've all said things that could be construed as insensitive or perhaps hurtful to a particular person or a particular group of people. I think every one of us have. Maybe not online, maybe not in a public fashion, but probably in private conversation. And I think we need to remember this. If not, we will become a society where everyone is guaranteed to have their 15 minutes of infamy. And I don't want to live in a society like that. At any rate, Jesus' question actually results, I think, in some degree of self-reflection on behalf of the crowds. Perhaps some of them realize that they aren't sinless before God and could one day find themselves standing in this woman's position, hoping for divine mercy. But maybe others make a more cynical calculation. Maybe they realize that if they actually pick up a stone and are the first ones to throw it, they would be declaring to everybody, look, I'm perfect, which would make them look really presumptuous in the eyes of their neighbors. So what happens? Well, let's look at the next few verses. They went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Just put yourself in the shoes of the woman for a minute and imagine the enormous sense of relief. The people that were once intent on killing her, the people who were once glaring at her with hatred and contempt, have just slowly shuffled off in shame, some of them anyway, and she's left standing there, and she's okay. And she's standing before Jesus, and Jesus tells her, "I do not condemn you." And you think about it here, Jesus is the only one who has the authority, who has the right to condemn this woman. Because after all, he, unlike anybody else, is actually without sin. So if he had chosen, he could have been the one to cast the first stone. But he didn't, and he doesn't now. Instead, he says, "I do not condemn you." And those words are so important to this woman. They are an expression of profound mercy. Jesus has forgiven her. And so therefore, this woman stands justified before God. In other words, she stands innocent in the divine court of law. She's been cleared of all charges by the Son of God himself. That's what it means to be justified. But of course, Jesus doesn't stop there. He also says to her, "Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." And I think that's important too. Jesus is not sending this woman back into a life of sin. He's not sending her back into this destructive love affair. No, he's sending her off on a new path, and this is a path of holiness. In fact, in light of all this woman has been through, it's hard to imagine her not wanting to walk such a path. Because after all, she's been given this incredible fresh start. She's been given this incredible new beginning by the Lord. So not only do we hear her being declared innocent in God's eyes, again, what theologians call justification, we also witness the beginning of a journey towards real holiness, which is what theologians call sanctification, the process of becoming holy. And I think This, for the most part, describes the path of all forgiven sinners, because we're all like this woman. I think we all, at one point in time, stood condemned before God, but we have received mercy and compassion from Christ and through his sacrifice on the cross. Jesus looks us in the eye and says, I do not condemn you. But he also says, go and sin no more. He sends us off on a life of holiness. He sends us off to walk in newness of life. And that's what the Christian life looks like. That's what the life of a forgiven sinner looks like. So, once again, beautiful story. I think there's good reason why this is the favorite story of so many Christians. So I hope that as we took a closer look at it today, you were blessed by it, and you were able to put yourself perhaps in the situation of that poor woman and have come to see, perhaps in a clear light, your own forgiveness, your own justification, and your own calling to a new life of holiness. All right. Thank you so much for watching today. If this Bible study has been a blessing to you, again, I encourage you to leave a like, and for more from Stone Church, please subscribe. Again, thanks for watching, and God bless.